Alright, today I want to talk to you about chronic fatigue syndrome. According to the CDC, recently they published that between 1 to 4 million Americans have the diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. And first off, let's look at the many names of chronic fatigue syndrome. I got a bunch of notes here from different readings and different courses that I've taken. I might have skipped it, but there's many names for chronic fatigue syndrome. Back in the 50s, it was actually called myalgic encephalitis. Encephalomyelitis. That was in the 50s. Then they changed it to chronic Epstein-Barr. Then they were calling it the yuppie flu. Then in the 80s, they called it chronic fatigue syndrome. That's what they changed the name to. But actually in the 90s, they changed it to chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome. But in 2007, recently, they actually changed it. So chronic fatigue syndrome is not even a diagnosis anymore. It's actually called myalgic encephalopathy. And you'll see why as I go through this. It might be a little deep for you, but there's a reason for it. So it's been shown as well by the CDC that 25% of people presenting in a doctor's visit, 25% of them, that's a high percent, actually complain of fatigue. Now that might not be chronic fatigue syndrome, but it's a huge amount of people in our society complaining of fatigue. I mean, think about it. If you say to someone, hey, how you doing today? They go, just tired. Most people are tired. How can you be tired when you're living life in this beautiful environment? How can you be tired all the time if you're living a healthy life? You shouldn't be. You should be enjoying life. You should be celebrating. As Osho said, you should not be living life. You should be celebrating life. So let's look at chronic fatigue syndrome. Typically with chronic fatigue syndrome, this is how it goes in a simplistic sense. You typically see chronic fatigue for greater than 6 months. You typically see like flu-like symptoms for greater than 6 months, like joint pain, sore throat, headaches, cold-like symptoms, things like that. You typically see cognitive issues, and you typically see sleep disturbances, such as like they can't sleep, they get just restless sleep, even though they're chronically tired. It's kind of weird. So basically what a lot of doctors say, the doctor that I went to the lecture said, problems with pain, drain in the brain, oh, I wish I could sleep again. So that's the generality of the symptoms. There's many different symptoms or classifications. So let's look at some of the classifications. In order to fit into chronic fatigue syndrome, or they call it nowadays myalgia encephalopathy, you have to have severe chronic pain or fatigue for greater than 6 months or longer the duration with other known medical conditions excluded by a clinical diagnosis. Concurrently have 4 more of the following symptoms: substantial impairment, short-term memory, concentration, sore throat, lymph nodes, muscle pain, multi-joint pain with swelling or redness, headache, a new type, unrefreshed sleep, and post-exertional malaise lasting for more than 24 hours. And that's a key point. So that's the classification. If you really listen to that, there's a lot of people that have those symptoms. And I'm not saying go diagnose yourself or go for the diagnosis, because once you label yourself or a doctor labels you, you're subconsciously screwed unless you really work to get out of that hole that you're put in because you're labeled chronic fatigue syndrome. We live through identification. We're humans. Just like, oh, I'm a Ford man. I get my Ford. I love Fords. We identify ourselves through external gratification. Might sound sick and twisted, but that's how it works. So let's look at chronic fatigue syndrome. Well, with chronic fatigue syndrome, there's actually a lot of work done, and they showed that there's a couple things that are happening in chronic fatigue syndrome beside these symptoms that I just went over. One of the things is they did a lot of SPECT scanning. This is like scannings of the brain. And they showed that basically after exercise or any type of exertion, see, people with chronic fatigue syndrome, typically, if you walk upstairs, they get tired. Or if they have to walk around the grocery store, they get tired. Well, they showed in these SPECT scans that in the middle part of the brain, the diencephalon, where the hypothalamus is, right? Or the middle part of the brain where the autonomic nervous system is, right? Your reptilian brain is the autonomic nervous system. It actually regulates sleep, and it regulates fatigue. So the fatigue center and sleep center is right in the middle of the brain. Well, they showed with up to 24 hours, there was actually decreased blood flow to these areas. So if there's decreased blood flow to the center of the brain, well, the center of the brain regulates many aspects of the body. If you look at the diencephalon, or the hypothalamus, middle part of the brain, autonomic nervous system, it regulates the thyroid. We could go on with all these different things what the thyroid does, but it regulates the thyroid. It regulates the adrenal glands. It regulates the gonads, right, your hormones, and regulates the gut. So it regulates the HPT axis, hypothalamus, pituitary thyroid, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal, hypothalamus pituitary gonad, and hypothalamus pituitary gut. So that's why you always say to people, you can't have a thyroid problem without an adrenal, gut, and gonad problem. You can't have a gut problem without an adrenal, thyroid, gonad problem. They're all intertwined. It's a web. So if these people with chronic fatigue syndrome have decreased blood flow to that part of their brain, they're going to end up with issues in these different endocrine glands, which are going to express themselves in the physical body, one of them being chronic fatigue. Other things they showed is that people typically with chronic fatigue syndrome have orthostatic hypotension issues. The orthostatic hypotension issues is when they're laying down, they sit up, they get really dizzy and lightheaded. Well, this is because adrenal gland issues in the production of mineralocorticoids, in being able to regulate blood volume and blood pressure. Okay, we could go on, but let's just keep it simple. Other things they showed is people with chronic fatigue syndrome typically have really low levels of DHEA. These are regulated by the adrenal glands. Now, if we look at the hormonal pathways and under times of chronic stress, what happens? Well, the body actually steals pregnenolone, which is your major hormone, from all your pathways, and you end up with deficiencies. We'll make it simple. So what I found from testing people with chronic fatigue syndrome, most of them, I would say actually everyone I've tested with chronic fatigue syndrome, actually is in stage 3 adrenal fatigue with severe adrenal dysfunction, or we should say severe hormone imbalances. So that's not one thing we want to look at, and I'll go over action items. Those are the two major things that you typically see is the fatigue, the flu-like symptoms, the orthostatic hypotensive issues. They're sitting or laying and they get up and they get dizzy, and that's an adrenal gland problem, as well as the stage 3 adrenal fatigue. You typically see hypothyroidism with these people because their metabolism slow down and they have a lot of inhibition of T4 to T3. You typically see severe hormone imbalances, usually low testosterone or low progesterone, secondary to the pregnenolone steal in the adrenal problems. And you typically see severe gut problems, typically with secretory IgA, which is your first line of defense of invaders coming in the body, because the adrenal glands actually help to produce immunocytes, which produce a layer in the gut, which basically protect you from outside invaders, to get technical. So you see a lot of people with gut problems from this, and they typically have leaky gut syndrome, which leads to an autoimmune disease. That's how a lot of people build up these antigens to get autoimmune diseases or food intolerances. So enough talking about it. What do you do? Well, this is a simplistic video. What do you do? The bottom line is you want to get a lab test. You want to go to BioHealth or Metametrics. You want to do the 401H or the GI effects to see what's going on in the gut. Parasites, bacteria, permeability issues, fungus, if you're digesting your foods, if you're breaking it down, if you're absorbing it, if you have food intolerances, on and on. You can also do the 90 antigen test from Metametrics to see if you have food intolerances. The second thing you want to do the 205 from BioHealth Diagnostics to see what's going on in the hormonal pathways as well as what's going on with the adrenal glands. Third thing you want to do is start leading a holistic lifestyle. Eliminate the crap foods from your diet. Caffeine, coffee, refined processed foods, aspartame, and pasteurized milk. You can go to our blog, you can go to our website at eastwesthealing.com to learn much more about nutrition and lifestyle principles. You want to make sure you're not eating a diet high in sugar. Sugar inhibits the immune system for up to 4 hours, 1 teaspoon. Same thing with the adrenal glands. Excess DHEA and cortisol actually inhibits the immune system. Excess estrogen, if you're actually progesterone deficient, actually inhibits the immune system. You want to take a look at all the stressors in your life, where they're coming from, externally and internally, and start to adapt to them using holistic lifestyle principles. You want to make sure you're taking a look at your sleep-wake cycles. Are you getting to bed on time and getting up at the right time, but actually getting a good night's sleep? Are you doing things prior to bed? And you can watch some of our YouTube clips to help with sleep. We have a couple of them, right? So there's a lot of things you can do with chronic fatigue syndrome. The bottom line is it's usually chronic and past the point where just maybe eating right and sleeping is going to help you, because a lot of the times it'll help you, but it facilitates the process. It's the foundation, and you need that. But most of the time you need to see what's going on with the thyroid. So you can do a thyroid test for free T4, free T3, TPO, and I'm drawing a blank on the other. Anyway, you want to get a thyroid panel done. Oh, reverse T3. You want to check your hormones and your adrenal glands. You want to do a gut lab, right? And that's the bottom line. You want to look at those 4 different axes. You want to look at the thyroid, the gut, the adrenal, and the gonads, which adrenal and hormones are in one. So hopefully you learned something from our YouTube clip. It's a large topic. It's just to get tidbits of information out there to you. And if you're tired, if you have flu-like symptoms, hopefully this helped you. If not, give us a call to set up your free consultation.